welcome for the first time. I'm Ray, and this is Ollie.
This is the only podcast that matters.
And it really is. Like, it literally is.
Literally the only
because
one.
Because this is the podcast where you get everything punk, proto-punk, post-punk, new
wave,
grunge, goth.
You name it.
History. All cool music. We're going to go over it.
Yeah, it's true.
One band at a time.
Because we have such good taste.
We listen to cool music.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just to be like, we're cool, but like objectively, like, it's cool genres of music.
And if you're listening, that means you listen to cool music too.
Cool. Or you're about to be.
We should be friends.
Yeah, call us. If you're sober, especially, call us. So something that we stumbled into, kind of accidentally just fell into place with our Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground episode was we spent the first episode doing more of a biography and a background and talking about how they came together. And then the second album, we really just dove into the studio albums. And we're going to try to actually make that a format and just see how it goes. Where this episode is going to be a little bit more background.
That's going to be about how the band was formed, how they met,
yeah,
kind of the beginning of their career.
And then we'll come back with episode 2 and we're going to talk about the albums, what was going on when they were writing and recording and what went into making the albums. Divide it up a little. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see how this goes.
What are we talking about today, man?
Today we're talking about what we agree is maybe the first punk band, the Stooges, Iggy Pop and the Stooges. Our first couple of episodes, we covered the proto-punk band, the Velvet Underground, and Lou Reed, and this is our first official punk band in our eyes. Some people think the Ramones are first. Some people think it's the Velvet Underground.
Some people think it started in England for some reason.
Some people don't think it started in Michigan.
Yeah, but we have this controversial take on where punk started, and I think
everyone
think
debates
it started in
New
Michigan.
York or London, and we say it started in Michigan with the Stooges, in Ann Arbor, and also in Detroit with the band Death. But today's about the Stooges.
Do you know what's so fun about Ann Arbor? So I learned this because remember we talked about how why Michigan and why this weird pocket.
Yeah.
But because Michigan was halfway between San Francisco and New York, it was often a stopover for lots of people who were touring their political ideas and their books and their music.
Interesting.
So that is where all of this
interesting because it's a
culture,
flyover state.
Exactly.
But it's not just the
so as Iggy
drive-through.
Pop said, whenever somebody bothered to stop, it would be in Ann Arbor.
Interesting. Didn't know that.
So that's why.
Yeah, Detroit's and Ann Arbor, it makes a little bit more sense when we get into Iggy Pop's surroundings growing up. You can start to see how it was formative and not totally random.
Exactly.
It's not a random Midwestern
So it turns
state.
out, as per usual, we did some research and it made sense.
We were why John Cale?
But why? Yeah.
Why Michigan? Oh.
Yeah.
What if you Googled it?
Yeah.
No, I read a particularly good book. Actually, before we get into it. The book I have
tell me what you were reading this week.
I should be telling people where I'm getting my
tell me about
from.
what you were reading.
The book I got most of my notes from that I read this time around was Gimme Danger, A Story of Iggy Pop by Joe Ambrose. Most of my quotes are coming from this bad boy.
Okay.
A book I would recommend that I'm not doing a lot of today, but I would recommend anyone who likes the Stooges or wants to get to know Iggy Pop. It's called Total Chaos.
What a cover on that book.
Look at this cover.
Whoever took that photo.
By Iggy Pop. It's a lot of photos and notes and newspaper clippings, but it's also interviews. All of the actual content are just in the words of Iggy Pop himself.
Where did you find these books?
This one I found them both online.
On Amazon.
I was just shopping around. I have a couple of Iggy Pop books from when I was younger, but I wanted to read something new that I hadn't read before. So this episode is mostly informed by Gimme Danger, but I highly recommend Total Chaos. It's a fun coffee table book. Right. You just flip through it and find something.
And it's
good.
Beautiful. The photos are beautiful.
And it's in beautiful.
I just want to say for the record that Ray reads. So she does so much research for these, and I appreciate it. And my job is sort of just to watch documentaries and interviews and things.
But it works.
Because we get different things.
Most people have a hard time focusing on reading.
Yeah.
And I can read for hours, but I have a hard time focusing on podcasts and documentaries because I'll be on my phone or if I'm listening to a podcast in the car, I go, how long have I been in my own head not listening? How many minutes do I have to rewind?
I do that when I read. I'm like, I've just read 6 pages.
See, and so it just... I'm better at consuming a different type of media than you, and it works out.
So what I watched this week, in addition to just any interviews that I could find with Iggy Pop, which are always entertaining, the Jim Jarmusch documentary titled Gimme Danger as well, came out in 2008, I want to say, is a fantastic look. You can tell that Jim Jarmusch and Iggy Pop were friends before they made this movie together.
Yeah, they have a cool
because they have a really great...
Yeah.
Iggy is just so open with him. Yeah. It's really special.
Yeah, he can be very vulnerable at times.
So he really goes into some pretty amazing storytelling And I like the animation that they use to kind of, in documentaries, is like if you don't have footage of something, it's like what do they do to like put on the screen?
Yeah.
And Jim Jarmusch decided to do this pretty great animation of all these
That's
things.
very hit or miss for me like that.
No, me too.
I liked. I
liked. So refreshing.
Ooh, interesting. I would like to watch that. I do have a little bit of an easier time watching documentaries if I'm with somebody because I won't be on my phone out of respect to the hangout.
Totally, yeah.
I'll be on my phone if I'm alone.
Right.
Anyway,
so
the Stooges, Iggy Pop.
He was called like the Godfather of Punk. Why was he called this?
I also found he was called the High Priest of
Punk.
Punk.
Oh, that's so much better.
That's great because a lot of people are called the Godfather, the Father.
Yeah. If you asked me, would you rather be a Godfather or a High Priest?
High Priest?
And I'd say I'd rather be a Warlock.
Fair enough. Warlock of the podcast.
But why was he called? Why did people put him on this pedestal in your opinion?
Okay, so I mean, our argument that this is the first punk frontman, that this is the first punk band, he was pushing boundaries. We did an episode on the Velvet Underground. They got experimental, but I wouldn't say they pushed boundaries the way Iggy Pop does. On stage,
yes,
in interviews, in his music, in all of his writing, in his looks and outfits, and the fact that he's like has a phobia of wearing shirts.
Yeah.
All sorts of things about him. He is always pushing boundaries and like
phobia of wearing shirts. I just got that. And the fact that he's terrified of shirts.
He's like scared of them. It's like man. You gotta hold his hand and keep him in clothes.
He is the icon. When we think of a rock star, the look, that's Iggy Pop started that.
Yes. The glitter. So there's a phase where he's silver hair, silver eyebrows, silver skin, silver pants, no shirt.
And I suppose we should give David Bowie credit for a lot of that too, but
I think both got into drag together, and we'll get into those years. But Iggy Pop was the high priest of punk because like he was making music with like non-instruments. He was making music to make you uncomfortable. He was making music that was reflective of the weird city he grew up in, and we'll get into that. But he was like, he paved the way. Like the Velvet Underground episode, we talk about how they opened the door for punk. And then he was the first brick in that road they like opened up for pavement. He was like a spectacle to behold.
Yeah.
Good luck not having your eyes on Iggy.
Exactly.
Anybody else could be. He could be on stage with like Lou Reed and Bowie, and your eyes are on Iggy. Yeah. Above all.
And that was by design. That's what he wanted. He wanted to shock and awe.
He wanted to shock and awe. There's a reason that the album Raw Power is called Raw Power. Yeah. That is a great description of the Stooges and Iggy at their finest.
So I have this thing where there's an interview from a show called Top Pop in Germany, not Top of the Pops, but Top Pop. He was asked the same question that I just asked you, and he sort of laughs and goes, well, so he says he defines what a punk is, and I wish that we had known this when we did our first episode. So he says a punk is the idea of someone who wants to do something very strong and very uncompromising that he believes in. But at the same time, he doesn't have the skills to do it. So as a result, many funny things happen. That's a punk.
That's perfect.
He also mentioned briefly that the term originally came from 1930s movies, which I hadn't found out before.
There's so many rumors of who started the word punk. I think we should have an episode where we debate the 10 different people who claim to have invented the word punk.
But he says that he thinks back to this movie called Maltese Falcon, which is a pretty famous movie, and there was a bad guy in that movie who had all these guns and wanted to kill everybody, but just didn't know how to use them, didn't ever do anything with it. Yeah. So they called him a punk. So yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I'm going to say another reason he's earned that title, not that he's this spectacle and it sort of comes naturally to who he is, but he earned that title because for all the instability and partying and drug use and lack of able to take care of himself that goes on and off throughout the years, he is always working his ass off. He is putting in long hours. He's working he's never phoning it in, even when he's in the most dire state, when he's waking up and he doesn't know where he is and he's practicing from midnight till 6 a.m. Like, he puts in hours. He's serious about his work. He puts in the effort. And so he's also, earned that title because he worked so hard for the music he made that has so much impact. It didn't just happen. It didn't just fall into his lap.
I think that's true for a lot of punk bands. People say they don't even know how to play their instruments, and to a certain extent that's true, but it doesn't mean they don't work hard.
Yes, it doesn't equate to a lack of integrity and effort.
And effort. I think effort's the main thing.
Yeah, it's and I think he deserves the title. That's not why he got it, But that's one of the reasons I'm happy he has it.
Yeah.
Because he put in the
Well, nobody
hours.
else deserves it better, I will say that.
No. And the eyelashes on that guy.
Like a baby cow.
A baby cow. How could you not be in love with him?
I don't know.
And I'll also say, for as much as he can be a little bit tough and a little bit of a punk in the traditional sense of that, he can also be very vulnerable. And he's also very easy to love. Mm-hmm. For somebody whose stage presence is marked by aggression and intensity and violence.
Violence, yeah.
And if you don't know Iggy Pop really and you just sort of know his reputation, it's one of aggression and violence and really causing a scene. He's quite lovable and sweet off the stage.
You can see that, like, he reverts almost to a childlike kind of wonder and joy when he's not on stage.
Yes.
And he talks a lot about how when he was in Chicago, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, he was in Chicago studying the blues and playing with blues musicians, that he noticed that blues players and fans of the music in that era were adults that had never lost the joy of childhood, and he admired that. That's really nice.
He does do a great job of holding on to his inner child in a way that, like, I would aspire to do. Yeah. I actually think we're pretty
We
good
should
at that.
all be more like Iggy Pop.
We should. I do find that I'm a pretty joyful person.
Yeah. I don't think I could do the self-mutilation on stage.
I don't think I could
And I love a
either.
t-shirt.
I know. We collect band t-shirts.
Yeah, right.
I can't get, I'm like, please look at all my t-shirts.
Yeah.
So I'm not, like, necessarily going to go topless on stage.
Iggy would be horrified by your closet.
He would be like, why do you have 85 men's XL
You don't need any
t-shirts?
t-shirts at all. I don't understand.
He's like, you should own one t-shirt and
Yeah.
you should take it off all the time. You should own it so you have something to take off.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's Iggy.
Let's talk about how Iggy views himself, shall we?
Okay, I got 3 quotes from Iggy about Iggy that I think are a great way to get to know him if you're brand new to Iggy here.
Okay.
1, I have no comment or opinion on what people say about the things I've done. My blood, my heroin, my dick, my pussy if I had a pussy, my mouth, my butthole. I have absolutely nothing to add. Think what you want about me.
Yeah.
Very punk rock.
Yeah.
Very punk rock. Say what you want. I have no comment.
And he's also said the same thing in reverse. He's like, I don't really have opinions on people. You know,
Yeah.
he said this to several interviewers.
He
They're like,
minds
what do
his
you think
business.
about this? Or what do you think about David Bowie? He's like, I don't think anything about it.
Yeah, he minds his business
Yeah.
and he wants of others to mind their business, which brings me to my second quote. I don't want to be biographized, which I read in his biography.
His biography.
And I felt a little guilty. I was like,
I
felt
wonder
like
if he said that to the person who was writing it. And
this was a quote from 1982, so it's long
Okay,
before this book was
okay,
made.
okay.
I started to feel like I shouldn't read this
yeah,
book.
you're like, oh no, this is actually a private thing.
But yeah, I should like violate it. But you know what? It's really on Joe Ambrose for writing it.
Yeah, that's his fault.
Yeah, he put it in the biography.
Cease and desist.
Yeah. And my favorite one
Yeah.
that really shows how he's quite funny. I'm a simple guy from the sticks. I'm a hick from the sticks. That just happens to be a genius and overflowing with talent. But other than that, my utterly superior grasp of my art and its implications. Other than that, I'm just a guy from the sticks.
That's really good.
Isn't that good?
Yeah, I
wish
love
I was
that.
funny.
I know, I love that. The only things that I like, the main thing that I found that he said was that, where is it? Oh, this was my favorite Iggy Pop thing because it's like it harks back to the childhood thing and then also just the free spirit of punk rock. Sometimes I get really upset if it's getting late in the day and I think to myself, I haven't done anything I really like today.
Aw.
So he's just like
real.
he's just
He's like,
chasing.
did I have a good day?
He's chasing the moment, right? Exactly, and it's
Yeah.
not like he wants to do always everything he only likes, but
He's like, was
he's
I
like, if I get to
happy?
the end of the day and I haven't done anything I really like, I should probably do something.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
What a great, that's almost like a tool for depression. Like, I have a tool where I always have something to look forward to.
Right.
I always need, whether it's like at the end of the day or a trip I'm saving at, like something through the winter or whatever. I think the best advice I can give anyone who struggles with depression is give yourself something to look forward to all the
Yeah,
time.
a little island of hope.
But
yeah.
that's such a good spin on it of like, and what did I do today
Yeah, exactly.
that I was looking forward to?
Smart
What thing did I
goals,
do?
yeah.
That's great.
Iggy Pop is like, what an icon.
He is an
Spiritual
icon.
leader,
I know.
emotional leader.
He is smart. He's smart. So those were quotes from Iggy on Iggy.
Yeah.
I have a quote that perfectly explains his stage presence, and feel free to look up any video of his live performance,
Right.
and this is going to reflect it. Glenn O'Brien, who was a writer on the scene in New York, who might get a mini episode at some point, Says of Iggy after a few years of fame, Iggy is still the same. He projects danger like no other rock performer. He walks a line between entertainment and attack, bringing the violent roots of rock and roll out in the open. He's still the best dancer in rock. Outraging primetime Jim Morrison, outstepping what James Brown and Mick Jagger were doing at their peaks. The highlight of the show is when he enters the audience. It is the theater of cruelty come alive.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is violent.
And I'm sure you people have seen the videos of him walking on people's hands.
One of my t-shirts is the Stooges. He's like not crowd surfing.
No, he's like standing on people's hands. Yeah.
It's amazing.
And like pointing, right?
I'm sorry, like bold to say somebody outsteps
James Brown.
James Brown
probably didn't love that.
I don't even know if I'm like, you didn't hear it from me.
Yeah. But the good news is Iggy Pop idolized James Brown.
Yeah.
So we do know that that's kind of where he got the vibes.
Yeah. Respect. But I'm just saying somebody else said that for the record.
Right.
Don't
get
comment
mad at
on
me,
it
James
like
Brown.
that's a stupid take.
What if James Brown sued us? That'd be great.
I'd be like, James Brown knows about us?
Oh, man.
James Brown knows my name. So that's what I got on a little get to know Iggy through some quotes. That's from me.
So he was born Jim Osterberg. He grew up in Ann Arbor.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that he's Jim.
Yeah, it is. It's a weird name.
He grew up in what he calls the outskirts of the outskirts of Ann Arbor. He's talking about how there is nothing going on there. His parents, he grew up in a trailer. He grew up in a trailer park. His parents had the means to live I don't want to say better life, but in a bigger, nicer house. They were well read, they were intellectual. Like, by all means, when people have this sort of judgment about trailer life, they did not fit the bill of those negative judgments that a lot of people would make. It like they encouraged him to be well read, they cared about art, they were like smart, well off people, and they just lived in a trailer park. It was just their choice they made.
Right.
But he grew up with a very different childhood than everyone else. He went to school, coming from that background, and he will attribute to the reasons he wants to make his music sort of chaotic and noisy. He grew up hearing like trailers driving by and trains and the noise from the radio being staticky and the neighbors in the trailer park and the tin doors slamming, and he heard like all sorts of metal and machinery and chaos.
And he found a calm in the chaos kind of thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I grew up doing my homework and reading on the bus, and it was very chaotic, and so now I can't read in quiet because I'm used to the background noise, and that's why I read at the bar. But I can relate to like, if you grow up with a certain chaos that is so normal to you and it's such a background noise that it's comforting, it makes sense that you want to create that. If he had a good childhood and his childhood was very much living in this machine city,
right,
it makes sense that he's inclined to make stuff like that. Right. So when you hear the Stooges and they're playing non-instruments as instruments, which we'll get into, when you hear him really interested in just like machines, it makes sense that his childhood, that was his surroundings, the city he lived in, the trailer park specifically, and he like fondly assigns that as a big influence in this type of sound he wanted to make. That was his childhood.
And when he started to get into music, the instrument that he chose to start with,
he was the
drummer. Loudest instrument of all.
He was a drummer initially. He did quite well as a drummer, and he was young. I mean, he was in the high school.
He was playing every day after school. His parents ended up moving him and his drum set into the master bedroom of the trailer because they would come home and he'd be like in the living room playing, and they're like, you know what, just take the master bedroom. Yeah. They took his tiny little room, and he was just like, sweet, now I got the master bedroom. Like, but so his parents were supportive of his playing.
They were supportive. I think, and by all means, he was like, he will talk about himself as feeling like an outsider and an outcast from other children, but by all accounts from teachers, parents, and friends, everybody else observed him to be a pretty normal child.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's not how he felt in his inner little world, but by all accounts, like, he fit right in. He was a good.
There wasn't social. Signs to say of what he would become.
He wore a shirt every day.
Yeah.
He was fine with shirts. I can't get over the shirt. He hates shirts so much.
Okay.
Can I tell you one fun fact about his high school era before we move on?
Please tell me like 2 fun facts about that era.
Okay, I'll give you one now and one later.
One afterwards, yeah. Go for it.
Did you know he was a golfer?
What?
Yeah. Can you imagine you're at the country club?
Right. And this leathery,
Wrinkled,
long-haired priestess.
silver haircut high priest. The punk walks in and sits next to you at the bar in golf shoes.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
And he's got just the collar of the shirt on.
Just the polo collar.
And just the pom-pom of the hat.
And the golf shoes.
Yeah.
And leather
That would
pants.
make my fucking day.
Yeah, he's a golfer. He was a golfer as a kid or teenager, and it wasn't like he kept up with his golfing throughout the years, but he would golf like on a day off, on a vacation or whatever, throughout the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Isn't that a weird
I bet
fact?
you that was one of the ways that he found peace. He also talked a lot about his seeking of like calm and peace in his downtime. And one of the ways he did that was by the ocean. He's like, I would get somebody to bring me to the sea.
Yeah, which is like quite the
Bring
conquest.
yourself to the sea. But he also talked about how having like receiving affection from somebody was his favorite way of sort of feeling at ease and calm.
Yeah, that's
which
he's
we can
a
all
lover boy.
relate to that. Yeah,
he's a lover boy. So, all right, so his drumming career. He was a very good drummer.
Mm-hmm.
He was, like, very much influenced by the music of, like, Muddy Waters,
Yes.
Chuck Berry, that rock and roll,
Chicago
the soulful
blues,
stuff,
rock and
Chicago
roll.
blues. He was good. He was playing with, like, bands of much older people
Right.
that were recognized and had a following. Like, he was a hired drummer for established bands. When different, like, Motown acts would come through, they would hire him for the night as, like, a session drummer. Like, he could have just been a drummer. Mm-hmm. That was his whole thing. He could have probably made a name for himself as a drummer. Had
took it
he
very
not
seriously,
just had
yeah.
such a calling to be a frontman.
Well, as he put it, I got tired of looking at other people's butts.
Not me, but like valid.
So his
different band names.
his band was called the Iguanas.
The Iguanas.
And this is when he's still in high school and this first semester of college. And these guys are sort of like, you can think Buddy Holly or, think the
Yeah,
Beatles
it's
on
not punk.
Ed Sullivan Show. Like they're playing a little surf rocky sometimes.
A little bit, yeah.
But even in that era of when, he's sort of when they're all dressing the same and they're all got the long hair. Even in that era, he's trying to find ways to stand out. Like at the one show, they're at like a foreign legion or a high school gymnasium, and he's on a 16-foot drum riser.
All his bandmates are being normal.
He's just on a 16-foot drum riser.
Look at me.
And
he's like acting like a front man behind the drums.
Exactly, yeah.
He's like, everybody look at me.
Yeah.
I'm the high priest.
So wait, is that how did he get his stage name?
2 different parts of his name.
Yeah.
From 2 different things. Iggy came from being the drummer for the Iguanas.
Okay.
Why the drummer got the name, I don't know.
'Cause it was
I think
Iggy
he
Pop?
just wasn't a Jim.
Yeah.
I think he just is an Iggy. So Iggy came from his band The Iguanas, which he named also, so that's part of it. So there was a guy named also Jim.
Yeah.
Jim Pop, who had like a nervous condition that had to do with hair loss, and so he lost all his hair, all his eyebrows, everything. And at one point, Iggy, early on, already showing his love for doing the shock effects of like the visuals, the different looks he goes through, he shaved off his eyebrows, and they started mocking him, saying he looked like Jim Pop, and he became Iggy Pop. And so that's where the last name came from. And then there's a really funny story that he's like, yeah, I shaved off my eyebrows. They started calling me Pop to make fun of this character in town and like whatever. And then I played one show and I was sweating and I realized why we have eyebrows.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, they're
so the
helpful.
sweat doesn't pour in your eyes.
He's like, oops.
Yeah, oops.
They're function. It's like I was finding out of John Cale.
Yeah.
He's like, you do need eyebrows.
Yeah,
I didn't know until I
after
got
all.
rid of them.
Oh man. So
that's his name.
Yeah, and then he leaves the Iguanas because he's kind of like he's not impressed with them anymore, right? He doesn't see.
I don't think he's challenged, and I don't think he's able to be a freak.
Yeah.
I think he is just, by the time he's 18, 19, 20, he's ready to do something. For as much as he was like a normal, polite kid, like he was a restless kid in Ann Arbor as well.
Right.
And he was ready to do something and make something. And I don't think sitting behind the drum set for like a pretty traditional rock and roll band was like scratching that itch he had.
Right.
As much as drumming does suit his personality, I don't think they were weird enough.
So that's when he moved on to the Prime Movers, right?
Yeah, the Prime Movers, which was like That's the band I'm talking about. That's an established band that was doing
Right,
pretty well for
right.
themselves. Very talented
Older guys.
musicians, older.
They played
gig.
blues.
Yeah. Talented blues, like
Yeah.
Motown.
They opened for the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, and they kind of like tried to emulate them.
He was by far the youngest member of that band. Like it was very impressive that he was that good of a drummer. Like this speaks to, it's hard. I don't have videos of Iggy drumming. Like I can't really say myself like what a great drummer he was, but it speaks to how good he must have been for him to be in a band that was this elevated
Right.
and this important in the scene, and all the other musicians were so talented. It gives you a little bit of context that he was a very good drummer. It gives you a high school band. Everybody's drummed in a high school band. You know what I mean? But this really speaks to his work ethic, his commitment, his ability to like follow through and be a part of this older group and like be on their level and whatever, and be a talented enough drummer for these people who are making a living making music.
Right.
This wasn't their hobby. This was a career for these people. This was musicians' careers, and he was playing with them when he was 18.
Yeah, he was like 18 or 19.
Yeah.
And then he even further went to Chicago, played with some like established names in Chicago
he had a
blues.
stint in Chicago that I don't think a lot of people.
I think he was there for like 6 months or something.
Yeah.
And I said one day he just was smoking a joint and was like, "I'm not black."
That's so funny. It's like they need me in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
He gets back from that, and do we get into the Ashtons? The early.
Yeah, because when he comes back from Chicago, he meets Ron Ashton.
Ron and Scott Ashton, the Ashton brothers, are kind of. Let me tell you what Iggy said about them.
Please.
These guys were the laziest, delinquent, sort of pig slobs ever born. Really spoiled rotten and babied by their mother. Scotty Ashton, he was a juvenile delinquent. His dad had died, his and Ron's, so they didn't have much discipline at home. Mm-hmm. That's his, like, friends.
Yeah.
Those are other members of his career-making band.
Like, Scotty was a
And
lifelong friend
them.
and collaborator, yeah.
Like, he loves them.
Yeah.
And he's like, they're fucking losers.
Mm-hmm.
They were ditching school. They were smoking pot when that was a much bigger deal. Back
Right,
then.
it was a huge deal.
And they were just kind of kicking around town, blowing things off. Ron Ashton and a friend just hopped on a plane and went to London to be like, the Beatles here?
Yeah, and they saw The Who, too, for the first time there.
For the
yeah.
first time, and then they got sent, they're like, you're 16, go back home
Yeah.
to your parents. They just kind of were hopping around doing whatever they wanted. They were kind of like the bad boys in town, but like, not cool.
Right.
They were like bad kids and troublemakers, but they weren't cool and edgy for it.
They weren't like greasers. They were like, yeah.
They were just
They were
kind of
just
like
kind of
burnouts.
slobs. Yeah,
Yeah. They were weird.
Yeah.
They were weird. And you can be
They
cool
were
and weird,
punk rock, even,
they were
some would
punk.
say.
Some would say they
Yeah.
were punk.
But they had like this very like heavy energy. That's what he keeps
Yes,
talking about
yeah.
that, which transfers into their music
And
later
so
on.
Scotty is 1 year older than Ron.
Yeah.
And they're brothers. And so Ron is going to be on guitar for a long time. Originally, they get together. By the way, when they're first forming, Ron and Scott and I believe Dave Alexander, the bassist, were in a band called the Dirty Shames.
Yes.
Which is a fantastic
It's a great name.
Name for a band, and that should be a famous band just for the name alone. They were in the Dirty Shames, and then Iggy basically said, all y'all come with me,
Right.
and we're going to be the Psychedelic Stooges.
Right, and for a while they just went to parties and said they had a band.
Yeah, and
which I respect so much because I've done that so many times. Oh, totally. I'm in a band with this person. You and I have said this millions of times. Yeah, we have a band.
Yeah, we made one song.
And then they ended up taking a trip to New York and they met these four teenage girls a little bit younger than them who also had a band, and they went to their like parents' basement and the girls blew them out of the water.
That's amazing.
And they were like, we should start rehearsing.
Wait. That's really funny.
Yeah.
So Iggy basically plucked them out of that band and said, follow me, I'm your leader now. But even though he was playing this leadership role, and he did name it the psych, which I'm so glad, at some point Danny Fields, who we'll get to, comes around and says, don't say psychedelic, just say Stooges.
That was their first manager, right?
Yeah, Danny Fields gets
one of their managers.
Danny Fields is 100% getting a mini episode. He recruited every cool band for a decade. He was the like music labels guy who would go out on the scene and
the
pick
A&R
people up
guy,
and sign
yeah.
them. And the old stuffy guys at the record company didn't see the vision, and Danny was the one who was like, I'm hip, I'm cool, I know what's going on, trust me. And then he would sign the Velvet Underground, the New York Dolls.
There's a whole show on HBO based on him called Vinyl with Bobby Caballero or whatever.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, Danny Fields is one of the biggest non-musician players in the scene who will get, for sure, an episode. But he comes around later and says, drop the psychedelic, just go by the Stooges, which was better. And they were named after the Three Stooges. Yeah. But they were psychedelic because they did pot and acid. But as much as he was the band leader here and the ringleader, Iggy was still a drummer. And they had Scott as the lead singer because Scott was considered by them the most like classically handsome. He was the looker. And Iggy was a drummer, and so it was just sort of natural for them to fall into these roles. But it wasn't long. You have a bit of a background on his first time. Yeah, so there was this. They, as far as I can tell, that they had kind of moved to Detroit by this point, and they had what is the name of their first house together? The Stooge Manor. The
Stooge Manor. So they had this rundown house, and Iggy talks all about how it was a true communist living. Like, they weren't political about it, but they shared everything. All the money was shared. All the food was shared. They ate at the same time. They spent their money on the band. And, like, so he talks a lot about that and how much he loved that. So then there's this one night when they're rehearsing, and they would just rehearse kind of all night long. And they're rehearsing down in the basement, and their manager at the time, who I can't remember the name is, but I think you have it. He comes down in the basement, and Iggy's been fighting with this guy, and he's really pissed off at him. So he hands his guitar over to Ron, and he takes the mic, and he starts jumping up and down like a chimpanzee about to get in a fight. And he starts singing at the manager and, like, singing his anger. And all of a sudden, Ron and Scotty just, like, turn up the power and turn up the volume, and they were responding to the way he was moving in this really powerful way. And so I think that might have been the moment where they sort of found their raw power. And it really became who the Stooges, or that was the glimpse of who the Stooges could be. And I think probably from that point on, Iggy no longer
turning back.
Yeah, you don't go back to that.
Seeing him do that. I don't think we go, that was weird, and then go back to putting him on the drums.
Right, exactly.
I think that was like something neither of them had seen coming or ever seen before.
Right.
And the bands around them, like, by the way, like, they came up on the heels of MC5, and MC5 was considered so mind-blowing, and this is, like, way far beyond. Yeah. This is beyond what Lou Reed is doing, this is beyond what MC5 is doing. Like, all these bands that are, like, making noise, Iggy just takes it so much further.
With the assistance of Ron and Scotty, too, because those boys are, like, if you watch them play live, it is uncomfortably powerful. It's like you think like sludge and heavy, but of course in a rock and roll way, you know. It's really wild to watch.
They are, for so long, from the early days, for most of this time, so much involved in what the Stooges are, their iconic behavior. Like, they're known for their violence as Iggy as a performer, but the whole band exuded this violent sound. And they were involved in the songwriting. They were the Stooges. It was not Iggy Pop and the
of course.
Stooges.
Yep.
It was the Stooges.
Right.
And Ronan Ashton and Dave Alexander on bass.
Yes, thank you.
Played very big roles. And it really, like, Iggy comes across as a ringleader because he's such a spectacle. They were all very, like, the Stooges would have been a very different band without any one of them. They all contributed more heavily than I think any of them get credit for. Because Iggy goes on to have such a long solo career and everybody knows him, and he's the one on the Stooges posters and stuff. But I want to give the other three members of the Stooges credit that I don't think they always get. You know what I mean?
I mean, I've always viewed the first, to be fair, so the first time I saw the Stooges play live was when they reformed for Coachella back in 2003. So they're all pretty old at this point. But that was the first time I saw them perform, and I was floored, right? So but what I was floored by was not Iggy Pop, because I was aware of him as a person and knew his antics. I was floored by Scotty and Ron playing. Yeah. So just from day one, watching those guys on stage with him, it's just a whole unit. You're right. It's just not, and I think that's where he was getting at with talking about we lived as communists. Like, we were shared everything.
They were like comrades for a long time. Yeah. And we're going to see there'd be a little bit of a division later on, but for the formative years of the Stooges, this is their team players, and they are all for one and one for all, which is, I don't know. I love when bands are really homies. Yeah. I love when they have good relationships. Right. It's always, all the bands that have drama are the ones that get attention, like, you know, the Kim Deal and Charles Thompson and Pixies and Fleetwood Mac. Like, we always talk about the people that are water and oil together, but I really like talking about bands that are groups of friends. Mm-hmm. I find that so much more interesting. Yeah. It's just so it just makes me happy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's like when you find out actors are friends in real life,
yeah,
and
exactly.
you're like, of course they are.
Yeah.
It makes it's
You
nice.
you believe the lie a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
So they're funny. The Ashton brothers are funny. Before Iggy came along, like Ron and Scott would be practicing together, playing like bass and guitar or whatever, and they would play along to records, and they're like, we are fucking nailing it. We are so good.
Yeah.
And then they would turn
Like,
the
did
record.
you guys just hear that?
Did you
I
hear?
heard it. It was amazing.
And they would turn off the record
And it would
and play
sound-
without it, and they were like, we're so bad. They were like, oh.
They tried one cover one time, and they got
Yeah.
about 20 seconds into it, and then
Didn't
they were
work.
like, it's not
Didn't
for
work.
us. Yeah.
I love those guys. I think it's all very charming,
Yeah.
honestly. That's it. Dave, the bass player, was from the Ashton camp. He's the one that went with Ron across the river.
Yeah, he went to
across the pond
India, yeah.
Do that. He was a young weirdo. He wasn't as much as maybe a character as the other two.
Right.
Because the bass player is always cool.
Yeah.
You know?
And he was cool.
He was cool.
But he just didn't have as big a personality, I think. And,
No, and I think you can't have
Yeah.
like everybody be these larger than life personalities.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work that way. One more thing I'll say briefly about Scotty Ashton is like him and Iggy had this really beautiful friendship throughout their whole life. They were collaborators throughout their whole life. Like Scotty played on tour with him after Lust for Life came out and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah.
And there's a couple interviews in that Jim Jarmusch documentary that are just adorable between
Really?
the two of them talking, and you can tell that Scotty Ashton has maybe lost a little bit of his mental faculties due to too much drug use or something like that. And Iggy is so tender and kind and patient with him. I swear to God, guys, it's the most touching little thing I've seen in weeks. So
Yeah, Iggy is like quite lovely.
yeah.
He's very sweet sometimes.
Yep.
He's very gentle considering the abusiveness that is like
That he presents, yeah.
The abusiveness is performative.
Yeah.
He is a performer. And then he's like just this little guy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like and then he's behind the scenes at Max is good. Like he's very much just this little guy.
So they're in Detroit. You know, they're at Stooge Manor. They're starting to rehearse and they're starting to play. They see MC5 for the first time, and their MC5 is at this point still kind of a cover band, like doing R&B and rock and roll covers. But their sound is huge, right? It's MC5, and so they go to their rehearsal space, and one night I think it's Iggy and Ron and Scotty all drive to the rehearsal space, and they ask to start being the opening act for the MC5. So they start to play with them in Detroit, and that's kind of how they start to build up their name a little bit, in addition to other things. MC5 tries to draw them into their sort of anarchist ideology, right? And they're trying to get them into the movement, and they're trying to get them to be a part of it. And I get why, because they're so powerful,
Yeah.
Iggy and the Stooges are sort of like, nah, man, we don't really care.
Yeah.
And people called them nihilists because they just didn't seem to have anything they cared about except for music.
Which is like, we covered this a little bit in the intro to punk episode, but the London punk scene was very much marked by like political movements.
Mm-hmm.
And the New York and I guess LA, like the American punk scene was very much more marked by, we want to do what we want. Fuck off, leave us alone, we're weird, we want to do drugs. So the punk attitude of the US was much more like, fuck off.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I want. Don't tell me what to do.
Right.
Whereas when we get into the Clash and stuff going on in London later, that's when you're going to see punk is famous for its political stances as well. But this is very much characteristic of the American punk scene.
Right.
That they're kind of like, and?
Yeah, right.
They're like, do you want to come fight the good fight? And
Right.
they're like, the good fight?
Yeah.
Like,
We
no,
want to take mescaline and play
Yeah,
music
we don't
all
wanna
night.
fight.
Yeah.
I'll fight
But
the
MC5
audience.
they dragged them along to the 1968 Democratic Convention, which is famously plagued by police brutalizing protesters.
Yeah.
But the Stooges, turns out, did actually play at some of the events surrounding that.
So like the lore of the MC5 lore is that they showed up when everyone else backed out, and they were the only ones that, like, I literally read that in one of these books, the MC5 books that I read, that the story everybody loves to tell about the MC5 is like, there were supposed to be 15 bands on the bill and 10,000 or 100,000, whatever, people show up, and everybody backed out except the MC5. But it's not true. The Stooges.
Well, I don't think the Stooges played on that same stage, but they were part of. So the convention was over a period of several days, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I think that the only fact that I can definitely say is true is that they played in that time
some
frame.
point.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
they were on that same stage as MC5,
Yeah.
but
Because, like, there's like this like majestic story about it. And it's like the
No,
only,
I know what you're talking about.
It's like the only story about the MC5 anyone.
And it's like kind of why they're cool.
Yeah, and it's like not even that special.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't love the MC5.
Yeah,
Respect
I think they can tell that it's not our favorite.
It's not our favorite. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine. I have nothing bad to say about them. It's just not for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so early Stooges.
Yeah.
Iggy is now not behind the drums. Scotty's behind the drums. Ron on guitar, Dave on bass, Iggy on front. This is going to be the format for the rest of the Stooges career, so long as these are the members. And Iggy starts playing instruments that aren't instruments,
right.
playing non-instruments as instruments. So Scott made like homemade drums. Scott would play on like
50 gallon oil drums,
and like put a microphone in the gallon and play it. So Scott was making up his own drums. Iggy Pop was a playing and
a vacuum.
Quote, vacuum.
How does one play a vacuum?
A blender. He put a microphone in a toilet bowl and would flush it. Which like where was
this water going?
How are you flushing it? Yeah. I mean, clearly not on stage.
He would just stick his microphone and stuff and see how it sounded.
He would put his microphone in like household appliance, which goes back to what he was talking about. Like he grew up with the chaotic sound of machinery and the radio going and the cheap tin doors being and like this is where it starts to come out. This is where he starts to do that thing I was talking about in his childhood that informed the sounds he wanted. He's playing things that like. It's weird that they call it playing. Like,
right, because I don't know how you play a vacuum.
You can't play a vacuum.
Turn it on and off.
You turn it, yeah. He's not like...
He was just cleaning when they were rehearsing.
He's like, would you guys turn it down? I'm trying to organize the space.
But they were all like this. They were all creating this.
Yes.
Like, to me, that sounds awful. Like, that sounds like the most chaotic rehearsal ever.
I'm prone to migraines. I would be out of there.
But these boys are, like, fiending for this sort of cacophony of like noise.
He literally wanted to make noise as much as it's not like he didn't want to make music, but he was mostly interested in making noise. And they did that. And they were very creative. And at one point that
was a good soundbite, Ray.
Thank you. Put that on the old IG. So all right, there's this one drum kit I have, this note I have on Scotty on the drums. He took a 55-gallon oil tank, spray painted it white, dropped a microphone in, and played it with an automobile repair body mallet. Like a
metal mallet.
Like a mallet.
Or I guess it was rubber maybe still.
This guy, Jimmy Silver, who was on the scene, was quoted, "It made a noise like it was inside of you or like you were locked inside of the oil drum because it was going through the PA system."
Yeah.
So he's like, you felt like you were in the drum or the
physical
drum was
pain
in you.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. This pushing, like, the bands before this were experimenting, but they weren't, like, inventing new instruments.
Right.
Like, they're...
Well, like just like John Cale, Iggy idolized. He worked in a record shop and he had all of these different records, not just rock and roll. And he idolized these jazz guys who were very, very experimental.
Yeah.
I think it was John Coltrane was one of his favorites, and so he was like doing his own version of this improvisation, right?
Yeah.
But with vacuums and blenders, and oil drums.
And the thing is, Joe Ambrose in the book that I talked about at the top of the episode, he said it was part hillbilly and part avant-garde, and it was both cool and uncool at the same time, which is perfect. That's also a quote I could have opened with. I mean, that's so the Stooges, especially their first two albums.
But that's also like anything that's new is going to be really hard to define, and to some people it's going to look cool, and to some it's going to be uncool.
And
so
it was
obviously,
very hit or miss.
Yeah.
Like record label execs were either all in or they were like, "This is trash.
This is not music."
The people who were in their camp were very in their camp, but most people weren't.
I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, they're creating and they're destroying at the same time.
And so, all right. So at this time, they're starting to. So they're in transition, I guess, on the way to making it right now. So they're playing shows. They have the manager Ron Richardson.
Yep.
He's having them play house parties where John Sinclair and different people are seeing them, and people coming from New York and seeing them play and getting them on the map. But they also are working regular jobs because they're not on a record label yet. So Ron is working in a head shop, like Scotty's whatever. For a while, Iggy has a stint as a waiter. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine Iggy Pop being your waiter? Can you imagine like Iggy Pop, like how's everything tasting over here?
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
I picture him from the cover of Lust for Life like that. Like
With the bangs. And
Yeah,
like,
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's him being like, what can I get for you?
Yeah.
I think that's a really funny gig for him to have.
Yeah. But he was good at it. He's a compassionate person.
He's so sweet, yeah, maybe.
Yeah. He
I'm
probably
gonna
had,
channel Iggy Pop in my next shift.
if anybody had Iggy Pop as their waiter, will you just email us
Yeah,
and
please
let
let
us
us
know?
know. Yeah, so Ron Richardson, manager, he's like a local school teacher who's like kind of a trendy guy. He takes them under his wing a little bit. He's not a record label guy. He's not signing them to anything. He's just managing, to the best of his ability, these 20 and 21-year-olds who are starting to party. John Sinclair sees him at one of these parties. He's involved with bands like the MC5. Like, he's gonna be somebody. When they get his attention, it's like, okay, some notable people are caring. This is what he said of them. It was drone-like trance music. It didn't rock, it didn't roll, but it was very powerful and loud trance music. But I really like that it didn't rock and it didn't roll.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so true. It's
Yeah.
not rock and roll anymore.
No, it's
We're done
it's
with
a whole
rock and
different
roll.
thing, yeah.
And the crowd that night was described as a writer, Sam Tracy. The crowd was local freaks, beatnik leftovers, closet faggot arty types, guys from other bands, suave teachers and lecturers, chic students, middle-class babes, one or two local music scene gangsters.
Sounds about right.
At the house parties.
Sounds like a great party.
At the house parties watching the Stooges play their early sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's their early practices, their early shows. Do we want to get into the drug use that starts coming around?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, during this whole period when they're living at Stooge Manor and they're quote unquote honing their craft, they're also like, you know, they started experimenting with marijuana at a, you know, when they met, when like Scotty and Ron met Iggy, they all started smoking pot, but now they're starting to experiment with acid and mescaline, psychedelic, pretty heavy psychedelic drugs. I read
about that in the 60s. It was acid. Mm-hmm. And then the acid would be a little bit laced with speed. Mm-hmm. And then the acid was more and more speed. And then eventually we're just doing speed and we're not doing acid anymore. And Ron Ashton will be a little bit of an outsider because Scotty, Dave, Iggy, members later that come along are all getting really into drugs. And Ron is the only one who doesn't do drugs, doesn't get involved in it, and feels left out and is also sort of pushed away because they feel judged, even though I don't know if it was his intent to be judgmental or not. But Ron would say, like, early on, like, Iggy was the straightest dude he knew.
Yeah.
And Iggy was completely a victim of peer pressure. And Ron is like, people don't think this, people don't observe this because he comes across as such a individual leader and so charismatic and powerful, and he just comes across like the band leader. And they don't, like, people don't realize behind the scenes, he was very easily pressured.
Yeah.
And so he very quickly, after starting to hang out with these guys and being in the scene, goes from being super straight-laced to kind of fucking with, like, whatever's around. It doesn't take long for this side of this, like, normal kid to kind of flip into this rock and roll scene. And Ron, over the years, this is gonna become, like, drive a bigger and bigger wedge between him and the rest of the band. But it starts off, I mean, they're not even recording their first album yet. And this rift, not really a rift yet, but there's tension.
Yeah.
It's like a tenuous thing that Ron is the only one who doesn't get involved in speed, acid, pot, eventually heroin, all of the things.
Yeah.
He's the only one that maintains it. And so they're living at the Stooge Manor and everybody else is partying and doing drugs. And Ron is just in his bedroom with his girlfriend.
Right. Just like doing a normal thing.
Not participating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are the early days. The drug use starts very early on. And we're going to see, like, before they're even done recording the first album, like, Iggy is in and out of sobriety.
Right. Struggling.
The whole time, all of the years we're going to cover in this episode, Iggy Pop will get it together and then return to drug use and then clean up his act and return to drug use. And he really oscillates between, like, clean, vegan, like, really going for it, to, like, using anything, you know, heroin, speed, anything he can get his hands on. He really oscillates to, like, extreme sobriety and extreme drug use. And it's like, you know, every year he's got it together, he's back, he's got it together, he's back. And this starts very early on.
This whole time that they're starting to play at these house shows and they're starting to play these shows, they have a reputation for being troublemakers, for causing a scene.
Very early on, they are, like Iggy said, delinquents, and now Iggy is one of them because he's apparently giving to peer pressure. Something that happens is there's a music festival at a college in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Delta Pop Music Festival, and they know, they're like, this guy Iggy has a reputation for walking into the crowd, harassing people, grabbing them,
right.
being violent, like making them a part of the show, like physically touching the crowd and being violent, hurting himself, making people, staring at people in a way that was like challenging, whatever. And so we know that we heard about this guy, and they're like, if you go into the crowd, if you go into the audience, you are not going to be welcome back. You're going to get kicked out.
Right.
And Iggy Pop starts the show and like immediately goes into the audience.
Does his thing.
He's like, don't tell me what to do. And they're like, you're out, get out of here. It was so popular, and they were so well received by the audience that, in fact, the next year
they were invited back.
they were like, so
they had to eat their words a little bit.
It was good.
Well, I think David Bowie said about his stage presence is like he was always like he was running off of a cliff. Like he never quite had it like contained what he was going to do, but you could always tell that there was something big coming. And he would cut himself on stage. Yeah. You know, he would get head on stage.
Yes.
He would smear peanut butter all over him on stage.
Oh my God.
What?
Do you know the story about the TBI, the live performance?
No.
This is the peanut butter one. So the first time the Stooges are on TV, they're on a live program on cable. And I forget where it was. They're doing this performance, and it's their song TBI, which I think is their second album, Funhouse. Not one of my favorites, but it's a good one. They're performing TBI, they're live. People are like turning in, and you know, most of the country hasn't seen the Stooges, by the way.
Right.
The New York people know about it because they've come to Michigan. Ohio saw them at the college festival. Mostly, if you're in Detroit or Ann Arbor, you've seen the Stooges or you've maybe heard about them, and that's it. And now they're on TV, and the average American is sitting in their living room and they can see this. And he, for whatever reason, smears peanut butter all over his, you guessed it, shirtless
chest.
body.
Yeah.
Not a shirt in sight.
Yeah.
Smears peanut butter all over himself, like covered, which is so gross. And he walks out into the stage, and he grabs a girl, and
what?
She has a peanut allergy.
Oh no! Oh my God! I had never heard this.
I'm so disrespectful. She died because Iggy Pop.
She fucking died.
I'm so disrespectful right now. He didn't know she had a peanut allergy. He didn't know she had a peanut allergy. He wasn't thinking.
That's insane.
Peanut allergies are pretty common, though. When you think about it, they don't even let you bring that to like elementary school lunch.
Yeah. To be fair, you shouldn't have rubbed peanut butter over himself.
No.
Jelly would have been a better option.
I don't know. Something else. I feel really bad. It's not funny. Somebody died. I'm sorry. Peanut allergy. Peanut allergies are like kind of funny.
That's why you don't rub
That's
peanut butter.
why you don't rub peanut, or like, yeah.
So he's known for all these antics.
He's known for like violence.
Yeah.
In all whatever form it takes. Peanut butter, knife, or whatever he's got on him. And that was the first time they were televised.
Yeah.
Which I don't think it was like drawn attention to.
No.
I think it was like a big thing. I think eyes were on Iggy and he got back on the stage and whatever. But fun fact, a little deep code. Not a fun fact.
Not
Very
a fun
unfun
fact. Yeah, it's not funny.
Not funny fact.
That's where they're at and they're starting to build up this audience and this crowd, and they're starting to get noticed, and that's kind of where we're gonna leave it off today.
Yeah,
we're gonna go over some of the great records they make next time.
I will say the one thing worth noting during this time is they have this Richardson guy as a sort of manager. They have Danny Fields kind of stepping in. They're basically sick of this manager. They start relying on Danny Fields more, but he's based out of New York. So there's almost only so much he can do. So he's in Ann Arbor as much as he can be. And he's starting to get phoned up with like serial crisis. Like, just so you know, going into before they've toured, they haven't recorded their first album. We're going to talk about their first album next time. He is being called in the middle of the night. There's rumors that they're behind like robberies, like liquor store robberies. There's crashing their vans. Yep. They are involved in different types of arrests, shootouts. I can't find why. There's like a motorcycle gang after Scotty Ashton.
That's amazing.
And I can't figure out. There's I don't know why.
He probably messed with one of their girlfriends or something.
That's what I think. Yeah. Probably a girlfriend. Unless it was, I don't know. They
so these guys are living the outlaw lifestyle.
Living the punk rock lifestyle for real. So before we even get in a studio, before we make an album, before they've made a name for themselves, they are doing it for the love of the game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which I respect.
I do respect. Yeah. Been there. I mean, I didn't like rob anybody, but we've partied for the love of the game.
Exactly.
We've gotten into trouble for the love of the game. You gotta. Yeah, so that's where we're at right now. We are 1969, let's say. Mm-hmm. This is where we're at. They have built a reputation for themselves. They're a mess. They're already deep in their drug use. And they haven't written more than a few songs.
Yeah.
And they're coming in hot, is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
And then we're going to be back with their first 3 studio albums.
We're going to talk about what happens during those records, and then unfortunately what leads to their initial demise as well. Kind of the big thing that splits them up. We're going to talk all about that next time.
Yeah, and I think it's a good starting point. And I'm going to post, obviously, every time we do an episode, I post pictures of the bandmates on our story and on our grid. But I recommend, I've never seen a photo of the Stooges that isn't phenomenal.
Yeah,
I really
true.
recommend, follow some accounts or some accounts. Right. I'll post them. I'll tag people, whatever.
And please go ahead and follow us on Spotify, because we post playlists of our favorite Stooges songs. We did one for the Velvet Underground episode, so we're gonna just kind of, if you haven't heard this band, or if you want to get a refresher, or if you just want to know what our favorite songs are, then
we post a little bit of every playlist has some of their hits, some of our favorites, something to show their range. A little bit, 10, 15, 20 songs, whatever we kind of throw together for each band. So if you are new to punk and you're following along and you're interested in learning, we give you a little starting point, sample of what you might be in for.
Just think of it as like your friend making you a mix CD.
Yeah, we're trying to make a mix CD to get you.
We have a crush on you.
We do. We have a crush on our audience.
Yeah.
You know, we have some really sweet, supportive comments and people on YouTube and our Instagram and stuff that are very sweet. And I'm like, literally, do you want to be friends? Every time someone's nice, I'm like, do you want to be our friend?
Yeah.
I don't even care about the likes. I just thank you.
Exactly.
It means so much to me when people are nice.
You do love when people compliment you.
I love it. It's so sweet. I've also been getting this a lot. This is very fun. I get a lot of, oh my God, my boyfriend loves your podcast. I've gotten 3 girls saying my boyfriend loves your podcast,
That's
which is
great.
Thank you, boyfriend. Girlies.
Listen up.
Girlies, tune in.
Yeah.
You're cooler than them.
So check us out on Spotify. We're called the only podcast that matters on there.
On Instagram, the only podcast that matters. Thank
YouTube.
you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you didn't like it,
get your own fucking podcast.
Your own fucking podcast.
It's really fun. Do it with a friend.
You won't regret it.
You won't regret it.